Prime Minister John Howard say at one point, "I don't care," he said, "about the constitutional niceties." The truth is, yesterday in Canberra, some of the finest judges, Michael Kirby, the most recently retired judge of the High Court, the Chief Justice of Australia was there, many great barristers, church leaders, and they were focused on the constitutional change that will have to be made to stop this happening again. The truth is, our Constitution, Michael Kirby said, I'm quoting his words, "Constitutionally speaking, Australia is still basically white Australia." And what he meant is that we have only references in the Constitution to exclude Aboriginal people from their fundamental rights. The two references to Aboriginal people were both done originally in 1900, the Constitution came into effect in 1901, were to exclude them, and they are referred to as Aboriginal natives. And we have never removed the stain of racism that was in the value system in 1900, when men, no women, no Asian Australians, no Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people shaped those words. They were literally the founding fathers of a small group, and they weren't universally in favour of these words. The power bloc at that time reflected this white supremacist view. And so, what Michael Kirby said yesterday in Canberra, one of our greatest jurists of our lifetime, he said the exclusion was aimed at Aboriginal people and what he referred to as the Chinamen out in the goldfields. Now today we live in a country that has people here from 230 different nations have contributed to our society. We are closer to equality than anywhere I've been in over 50 years of travelling this world. But we still have a constitution that has the stain of racism and discrimination. You can go to the website of You, Me, Unity. It's a government-funded website. And look at what the eminent Australians, they are lawyers, they are judges, they are very prominent people, and the committee of 20 that the government has appointed is looking at what we should change in the Constitution to give equality to all Australians, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the new arrivals, and those that have been here for hundreds of years but are still tasting discrimination. And the important message on that website is, you do have a voice too. And it is our generation's responsibility to see that we don't say that document represents our value system in this community. I know you wouldn't be here tonight unless you were concerned to want to know the truth of the issues. The difficult part is how to make it personal, how to effect change, how to see that we can actually prevent discrimination. You have to wonder when the United Nations Special Rapporteur, Professor James Anaya, who you saw in that film, who is considered one of the finest human rights specialists in the world, came here, told our nation and told our government that this is blatant discrimination. We signed on to that Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, but we don't honour what we've signed on to. I know you, in your own family values, don't accept this. So what do? Along next came the UN Human Rights Commissioner, Dr. Navi Pillay. She said much the same thing, that this is ongoing discrimination. The government is putting out letters. I wrote myself personally. I petitioned along with the Aboriginal leadership. We travelled the country showing this film, hiring cinemas, putting it on to say to the people, do you really want to live in a nation that officially allows discrimination? And the government, through the Minister for Indigenous Affairs, Jenny McMullen, wrote to me and many others with essentially the same deception as you could hear in the government spokesman speaking throughout that film. The replies that we got, this included Malcolm Fraser, the Chief Justice of the Family Court, Alistair Nicholson, now retired, many others like Fred Chaney, Ian Viner, a former Minister for Indigenous Affairs in a Liberal government. And as I said, Malcolm Fraser, the former Prime Minister. All of the people who wrote and got an answer, in my case 4 months after I wrote to the government, it took to even have the decency to respond. Even though we are out there saying, you have not consulted these communities. The question I wanted answered was this: are you prepared, Minister, to swear on a Bible that you consulted these communities before you launched this intervention? Now, you know this happened on the Howard government's watch. But when the Labor government was elected, they sent out a review. It was led by some very eminent Aboriginal people, Peter Yule and Marcia Duncan. They recommended that this be completely remade. But what they pointed out was there had been no prior informed consent. Why are those words important? Because it's our law. Our government has led us into a situation in our federal parliament. This happened with both major sides of politics agreeing to have us as a nation break all of the covenants that we've honoured. The law says you cannot do this without the prior informed consent of the Aboriginal people who own those lands. It is the same as if the government came to your front door, and as Marcus Lacey, the young man, said, and said to you, I am going to tell you what to do with your children. And you're not going to get any improvements to the local school. You won't have anything done in your community until you sign over your land for 40 years. In the beginning, they wanted the leases for 99 years. At the moment, they ask for 40, and the assumption is it will be rolled into another 40-year lease. Tom Calmer, recently retired as the Social Justice Commissioner, said, would any of us accept that trade-off? That to have what this community of Avalon requires, to have a library, to have a school, to have places where our children, when they are sick, can go and get treatment for their problems, we wouldn't say we have to sign over Avalon for 40 years or 99 years to have any of those fundamental human rights addressed. This is the deception. It was never about the children. The film here ended, the shooting of the film started in the first months of the intervention. We stopped. We could have gone on. We're actually into the 4th year of the intervention. So some of those numbers will be different. This stopped towards the end of the 3rd year of the intervention, which was June 2010. What has happened between June 2010 and now is the Australian Crimes Commission completed an exhaustive investigation and confirmed officially, you may look on the website, there were no paedophile links. People said this at the time. The authors of the Little Children the Sacred report said, this is not what we are saying. The truth is, the abuse of children, the neglect of children, is a global problem, and in every community, in every part of Australia, yes, there is neglect and abuse of children. 1 in 4 Australian girls and 1 in 7 Australian boys suffers some kind of neglect or abuse, and those figures are not acceptable. Yes, there are alcohol problems. The Northern Territory as a whole is awash with a drinking problem. Australia has a binge drinking culture. But the point that Tom Calmer was making there was, and Bob Randall in Central Australia, in the Wurundjeri community was, don't confine this to one group of Australians and say these things only happen among one group who happen to be Aboriginal people, who happen to be in a part of Australia that for the other agenda, as the Aboriginal people see it, they are prepared to take away their rights. All of those things have been investigated by federal police, by the Australian Crimes Commission and by the Northern Territory government. Sadly, I have to tell you, the Northern Territory government now says, after 4 years of the intervention, the genuine well-being of Aboriginal children for the whole of the Northern Territory has declined. There is greater anemia, there is more non-school attendance, there is certainly a very dangerous elevation in young Aboriginal suicide. And so the social impact of this, in my view, we are watching now a policy that has done more damage than anything in my lifetime since the policies of the stolen generation. The old men who are in so much pain, and that dear woman friend of mine who you saw at the start, why their hearts are breaking is they have seen it all before. And if there are any of you in this room who are 50 years or older, you will remember we saw the same lunacy about this moving people to the growth towns. That happened when we were younger in Western New South Wales. They emptied the missions and created housing commission housing, substandard housing compared to the rest of the community, and herded people to the fringe of towns all over Western New South Wales. And it took those communities another 30 years. Good men, good women, good children, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, saying this isn't the way to live. Why are we living with this barbed wire, this space between us? All of the discrimination and that pattern is because the government constantly is undermining the right of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to control their lives. The mining agenda, yes, Australia is at the crossroads. Some Aboriginal communities you will have seen on Four Corners last Monday night looking at Andrew Forrest's behaviour. You could look at many stories that have been done about this and make up your own mind. What is happening, as the Aboriginal people said, is it is about control. The mining will go there. The Aboriginal people in most cases do not oppose the mining. They want to preserve their sacred lands, their sacred sites, their culture. But they don't want the disease that goes with the development, the fringe-dwelling disease, because I'll tell you, up close, on the edge of some of that mining is where the neglect and the abuse starts. It's when these worlds collide and the exploitation of remote communities alongside bauxite mines, iron ore, uranium mines, it's often that contamination that is doing the damage to Aboriginal societies. What they want is a respect to actually involve them in the decision as how this would be done, if it's to be done, and then let them have a voice in the development plans. Herding people off the homelands towards these 20 growth towns is very, very dangerous. The medical evidence from the Menzies School of Health clearly has established, I've worked with a lot of those same homelands, the families are healthier. What this policy has done is put enormous pressure on families that already have significant stresses. So the larger towns, I'm flying to the Northern Territory on Wednesday, Katherine, Tennant Creek, Wadare, Nooka, Alice Springs itself, all of the bigger settlements now have massive new problems because the social engineering moving people from their traditional place because they can't get resources there, because the community stores that have been licensed now to spend that basics card are largely in those growth towns. So by moving the money and most of the investment in health and education to the growth towns, slowly you are moving people steadily off the homelands. You add to that for the first 4 hours of every day in the schools, they are not allowed to teach in the local language. These children dream in their own language. They talk to their mothers and fathers and one another in their own language. They have, in addition to their languages, Creole and intercommunal Aboriginal English. None of this is in the plan because it is, as one of our most eminent historians said, Henry Reynolds, there is no other word for this but assimilation. It is still the same pattern to say, yes, of course, these children must learn